always find your appearances very entertaining, Mike. I've been on that show a number of times, and I always feel like, I'm a guest in Paul's house, and I'm not looking to make any waves or tick anybody off, and I just kind of break down whatever Paul's asking me. You go on there, you empty out a couple of barrels. Like, okay, who am I going to piss off today? I'm going to piss off Paul. I'm going to piss off the Florida fan base, the Ole Miss fan base. But I love it. I mean, it's entertaining. First off, pleasure to have you on. You and I finally met at the Spurrier banquet a few months ago. We know a lot of the same people. We're all covering the same type of thing. I know you and JC have crossed paths, but we've never had you on. I'm glad we could make this happen, and appreciate the work that you do. So thanks for taking some time.
Well, I really appreciate it. And you're right about the Finebaum show. I mean, I tell people it's like getting on an airplane. You don't know if you're going to have a bumpy flight or not. And Paul kind of takes it there. And it's almost like if he says fasten your seatbelt, there's going to be turbulence, then, sometimes it's better to be proactive than reactive.
But I get the sense that because a lot of people misunderstand, they see like a couple of people going at it like you guys do in the spirit of entertainment. And I think Paul knows, like, okay, I've got something here that's a lightning rod. When Mike Griffith is off the show, he's going to give me 2.5 hours of content because all the callers are going to be ticked off and they're going to throw you under the bus, which they do. And he's going to have some fun jabbing. But I get the feeling you guys, I know Paul's not a big drinker, but you could easily just like go and have beers and have a great time. But if you didn't know any better, you would think like you guys were adversaries watching that show.
Yeah, like I said, I never know what's coming next. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, what I try to do, Mike, and I think you do it really well, is I try to say what everybody else is thinking, but maybe they're afraid to say it. I mean,
right.
Let's be honest. There's been cases over the years, whether it was, Dan Mullen's Halloween costumes or, some of the stuff that's happened at Ole Miss that you've kind of wondered about with Lane Kiffin. And it's like, let's not just sweep all this on. I mean, is Eli Drinkwitz really the SEC coach of the year? I mean, this is like the best award, for what? The guys who aren't really great coaches. I mean, the thing with me, I cover Georgia now. And people say, well, you're a Georgia fan. Well, no, actually, I covered Tennessee before that. Oh, so you're a Tennessee fan. Mm-hmm. No, I covered Alabama before that. Oh, so you're Roll Tide. No, before that, I covered Auburn. Well, wait a minute. Why do you keep, changing jobs? Guys, it's been 30 years. It's like a coaching profession, and it's been opportunities and getting to do shows like this and meet different people and kind of just go with the flow, go with the format. Paul likes to be combative. Paul likes to touch on controversial topics. Let's go. If you want to be informational and rational, if you want to be fun, if you want to do the show with Chris Doring and Peter Burns, it's going to be a little bit more lighthearted, a little faster. So I just kind of try to go with the flow. And listening to your show today, I mean, it's really entertaining. Listening to that list, JC was going off on the coaches. I was trying to figure out who these. I'm like, wait a minute, these are all Big Ten coaches, and it was like, it's not a very deep list.
No, it's not. That snuck up on me too. I was like, that's a little light for the AFC, NFC, two titans of the sport right now and of college athletics. Something tells me that'll be upgraded with all the money coming through that conference pretty soon. So you hit on something I was going to ask about. That is your background. You've covered a number of different programs, and you're not originally a Southern guy, right? You went to Michigan State, is that right?
Well, I mean, it's kind of one of those long stories. Born in Alabama, right?
Okay.
Grew up in the Midwest. So because of the birthplace and the early taste of college football growing up, I always followed, college football in the South. The Keith Jackson games. You mentioned, Vern. Mm-hmm. You could just tell that there was a passion with SEC football that does not exist in, I don't believe, any of the pro sports or certainly none of the other conferences. So, I stumbled across something early that I could feel the passion for. And I love sports. I played sports. And so my career goal was to come down and cover the SEC. And I had the opportunity to do that in 93, covering Auburn. And they went 11-0 and did a good job there. So I got hired in Mobile, where I was born. Got promoted to the Alabama beat and got to work with Gene Stallings and that's Abel Sweeney. And these guys open the doors up and every practice is open and you learn so much. And then Knoxville calls with a job. So I go up there in 98. They win a national title. Philip Fulmer and John Chavis and David Cutcliffe. And now these coaches are who I'm talking to on a daily basis, and just learning so much about the game and breaking it down, that when it was time to move on and go back to Michigan State for 4 years and go back to Tennessee or go back, everything's closed. But I know what's happening behind those doors, Mike, and you've been in covering this long enough to know as well what's really going down. So I'm not necessarily stuck eating the narrative that they want to feed all of us. When it's time to call BS, we can do that.
Sure. So how long officially have you been on the Georgia beat?
It's unbelievable. It was 2018. So it's 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3. You can tell I'm a journalism major, not a math major. I guess this is 7 years, right?
Okay.
And so, I do the SEC stuff as well.
Right. But I mean, you talk about timing. I mean, you're around for were you covering Alabama the 92 title under Stallings?
No, I got there. I was at Auburn in 93, and I did Bama in 94 to 97.
Okay, that's right. Okay, I got my. You covered the probation, the Terry Bowden years. That was always because he starts off 21-1.
He won his first 18 games. I mean,
right.
I'm still waiting for the ESPN 30 for 30, the best team you never saw.
Yes,
it was the only undefeated team in the nation that year.
That's right. I remember you'd have to, for their conference games, you'd have to buy them on pay-per-view because they weren't allowed to. Back then we had TV bans. So if you wanted to see Auburn play a game in 93 and you were like an opposing fan and you wanted to see them play on the road at Jordan Air Stadium, you had to pay $30 because they weren't allowed to be on TV. Where I was going with all that was, from a standpoint of you get to cover the what has become the premier program in college football. So that's the cool part, right? I mean, you're going to national championship games just about every year. You're going to playoffs just about every year. You're going to Atlanta for the SEC championship game just about every year. Georgia, to me, has almost become the most boring program to talk about because they're just so damn good. And they don't have, other than, kids in cars committing a lot of violations. They don't have a ton of controversy. They don't have a whole lot of, angst or setbacks or just the things that normally are great for you guys to cover, in print. It hadn't been a lot of that. It's been a lot of roses. So how do you, as a guy that, likes to report all sides of everything, how do you try and balance that at all? Because it's been pretty damn rosy in Athens here the last few years.
Well, I mean, you just said it. I mean, Georgia is the Rodney Dangerfield of national championship programs. I mean, listen, Kirby Smart hasn't lost a regular season game since 2020. I mean, that is just mind-blowing to me. Kirby Smart had 3 straight undefeated SEC seasons. That had never happened. Going back to 92, nobody had done that. Nobody, much less in an era where there's portal and transfers and NIL. This is easily the most competitive era ever. I mean, the guy's won 20 straight games going back to 2018 when he's had more than a week to prepare. And there's no active coaches in college football that have beat this guy since 2018. But he can't win Coach of the Year, Mike, because when I talk to people about it, they say, well, he's supposed to win.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so tell me when in these last 2 national championship runs in the last 3 years, when they lost one regular, they lost to Alabama and the SEC. There were no Coach of the Years then either. So to your point, it's just assumed that Kirby's supposed to win. It's just assumed that Georgia's supposed to win. And yet when they won the title in 2021, they hadn't won one in 40 years. Mm-hmm. So the reality of it is, and Kirby always finds things, and listen, he doesn't talk about any of this stuff. He has no clue. All he cares about is tomorrow, winning the race to the mailbox with his kid to get mail. You know how competitive this guy is. Mm-hmm. He doesn't give a rat's ass about this stuff. But when I'm watching this and I'm looking at how this is going to be reflected in history 20 years from now, and someone says, hey, who was the best coach in the SEC in 2023? Oh, that was Eli Drinkwitz. Was it really? I mean, I'd give it to Saban. Was it really Eli Drinkwitz? Oh, well, you know how it works. We got to kind of lift the little guy. Don't tell Oklahoma that Eli Drinkwitz in Missouri is the little guy, because they're outbidding Oklahoma for Oklahoma players and players that Oklahoma wants. So if you're wondering what happened to Oklahoma football, it's in Missouri now. They're getting those players. Missouri has more money and is doing a better job, okay? And so no, I'm not trying to diss Missouri. I'm just trying to make the point that I would like to see the best coaches win Coach of the Year. I think, Mike, that we're doing ourselves an injustice by rewarding the wrong people. And I think Georgia, because of the Nick Saban factor, I mean, how many times are we going to hear on game day between now and, Nick's next fireside chat about how happy he is in his retirement as he looks absolutely miserable when they show him on camera watching basketball games, that Nick Saban was 5-1 against Kirby Smart. My God, that has jumped the shark. But you know what? I get it. He's an ESPN personality. You're going to play him up. He did beat Kirby that many times, but that ship has sailed. But we're not hearing about, to your point, which you brought up, we don't hear a lot about Georgia, even though Kirby has built the best program in the nation. He doesn't get the individual accolades like I think he should, some, and you don't talk about the program very much when all they've done is win. I mean, I think this is kind of a Nebraska-like run. When I think of Nebraska in the 90s, this has been that level of dominance, but you just don't hear a lot about it in the national narrative.
I think a lot of people, I was talking about geography and how large a role it plays and what programs can be dominant and what just kind of remain mediocre or some flounder. People always looked at the Georgia job as an elite job that you should be able to get all kinds of talent because it's a talent-rich state. You're not far from Atlanta. It's a cool campus. Like, it's got everything going for it. To those people, I would remind you that Ray Goff had great recruiting classes and didn't win anything in Athens for years. There were other coaches that went to Athens and had, here and there blips of success. And I love Mark Richt, and he was at that event that you and I were there, and he class act, and he helped set the table. I've always said he deserves some of the credit for setting the table for Kirby. Kirby took over. Most coaches take over after a fired coach, and it's a broken down car. No, he had a really nice car. He just needed to fine tune it a little bit. But that said, Mark couldn't get it to the level that Kirby did. So there's no question. He's an elite coach. He's done an elite job, and he has this thing rolling. I mean, you just had a spring game. I know you covered. Does Georgia have any needs whatsoever? Every program out there has needs. What does Georgia's need?
Well, I want to skip back on something you said, make a point.
Yeah.
As far as Mark and Kirby, Mark didn't have facilities, and Mark didn't have the investment of the boosters to the level Kirby does.
Right.
And I will draw a parallel to when I covered Michigan State and got to know Tom Izzo really well on that beat. As you said, I went there. Nick Saban couldn't win. He couldn't win big at Michigan State. And I don't want to say that Mark Richt was as strapped as Saban, but Saban's problem with Michigan State was they didn't want to make the financial commitment to get the things in place that they needed to go head-to-head with the Michigans and the Ohio States when it came to facilities and recruiting budget. And not that anybody was being paid back then, wink, wink, but he did not get the commitment that he needed. And so even a guy like Nick Saban has to have things in place. And that, in fact, was part of the deals that he made when he went to LSU in Alabama, was to have the things in place that you needed to win. When Kirby came to Georgia, there were some agreements in place that this building was going to get built, this football building. And I'm sure, this donor group was going to be formed. So these are coaches that I think along the way, Saban, and the Saban story came up for me because Mark D'Antonio did such a phenomenal job winning a couple of Big Ten titles. I mean, how does Michigan State ever beat Ohio State, Mike? I don't know that we're ever going to see that happen again. That should have never happened. But because of Nick Saban's push and Michigan State realizing this guy got away, they said, you know what? This time around, let's listen to the head coach and do what he says we need. And I think that's what happened at Georgia. So I say that because I don't think that Mark had the same things to work with as Kirby. Jeremy Pruitt was a guy in this mix. You might remember Jeremy spoke up about this when he was an assistant on Mark's staff, kind of stirred the pot, upset a lot of people when he said, look, these facilities here, we got to get a bit, and people are like, whoa, hush. No, you need that. People say, well, what happened to Florida? Florida, for years, did not invest in the facilities. Now, you can say that Dan Mullen was behind but the bottom line was, if you're not constantly building, you're going to fall behind quickly. So I wanted to straighten the narrative because I think sometimes coaches get put in a box. And I think Mark Richt was a fantastic coach. And he was at that event, Mike. And I was so glad you were there because that was the third year of the Spurrier Award. And I started that award 3 years ago with Coach Spurrier. because I felt like this is a guy that should be honored. When I think about great times in college football, I think about those 1990 Gators. And like I said at that night, I said there were 2 scores everybody was looking for if they weren't at the game. They wanted to see what their favorite team was doing, and they wanted to see who Spurrier was putting it on and what the score was. and that was just how it was. And so we honored Mark as a legend, and to see Coach Richt and Coach Spurrier on the stage together, to me, that's what makes college football special. I don't want to lose that, man. I want to see these coaches, these faces, these personalities, these names. I want to see this continue. And so your programming is very important to have historians like you and JC that can speak of the past, that can put the current into perspective. Because my gosh, if you go on Twitter, there's so much garbage you can get on your brain. It's hard to know who to trust and what to believe. But when you've got a show like this with folks like you that have got the history and the background and the journalistic integrity to provide good perspective, this is what protects the sport. So again,
I appreciate that.
To be on with you today. It's a great conversation.
That's very nice of you to say. I mean, we consider this a labor of love, right, JC? I mean, this is just like we can't think of anything we'd rather do than not just follow college football, but talk about it, and hopefully somewhat intelligently.
Well, I just know every time when we've talked about recruiting, I just remember Googling JC Sherbert so many times because I was not that guy. Like, let me see, how good do I think he is? According to, this is a great landscape for us, and I love your backdrop, by the way. All the Right Moves is absolutely one of the best movies.
Classic.
I say and pipe, you say.
That's right. That's Craig T. Nelson as the coach. You got Chris Penn, Sean Penn's brother, what looked like a very slow linebacker. Don't mean to feed into stereotypes, but he was still getting looks. If he didn't impregnate his girlfriend, who knows what would have happened. Yes, it's a classic 80s movie that you got to see.
A Furman reference in there. I'm
Furman reference, yep.
I'm from upstate South Carolina, so Furman in the 80s was a power. So I was like, what is it? Junior's going to Furman. Yeah, when he was like talking about it, so-and-so's going to NC State, so-and-so's going to Furman. And he ended up going to Cal Poly, which is probably one of the most beautiful campuses in the country, from western smog-filled Pennsylvania to Cal Poly. So he kind of got a rebirth there, so to speak, when Coach Craig T. Nelson took him with him.
Play the ball, not the man, JC. Play the ball, don't go through the man. I mean, those tenets still apply today, 40 years later, when you're talking about great cornerback play.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm still disappointed that they lost to that team with the dynamic running back.
Walnut Heights should have taken the safety. Instead, they handed off to the fullback. He had a lot of issues going on. He fumbles it on a wet field, and it's a heartbreaker. It still pains me today. I'm not even a part of it.
Kind of like Alabama's lost to Michigan. The quarterback runs the wrong way. The legacy is ruined. Nick Saban couldn't beat Michigan at Michigan State. Ironically enough, he gets knocked out of college football.
Oh boy! So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean you've given Saban a little ribbing on the shows before. I know you have respect for him. We all do. But that brings me to the question: like, what take did you have that drew the most ire from SEC fans or college football fans in general?
Well, there's been a couple. One was when Paul asked me where I thought Kyle Trask would finish in the Heisman Trophy race after they beat Georgia in 2020, and I said 4th or 5th.
I remember that. Yeah,
he was appalled by that. Which, by the way, Kyle Trask finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy.
Right.
And probably the second, when I talked about the awkwardness of the Kalen DeBoer takeover, when Saban just staring him down from the front row, and I said, look, there wasn't a good answer for this. If he's not there, he's not supporting. If he is there, he's a distraction. I mean, Kalen DeBoer, I mean, you ever even heard of this guy too? Let's be honest. When Kalen DeBoer was there with Fresno State, were there Alabama fans going, that guy on the other sideline, he might lead this program one day? When he was in Indiana and those Indiana staff members were going out for dinners, they were saying, you know what, 5 or 6 of us are going to be coaching that Alabama team here in a few years. I mean, no, I mean, this was, and the crazy part about it, Mike, was you could see this coming a mile away. You could see that Saban was on his way out. He was not being the same guy. I mean, he was on television every week, yakking it up with Yahoo McAfee. Like he really enjoyed this guy's company and they were on the level. Like, you really think these guys would go out for a beer together? No, they were preparing Nick for his next role with ESPN. He's buying the $17 million house. He's buying the deal. That doesn't mean anything, doesn't it? Because that ain't the Nick Saban we knew. And then the take that I just can't get away from, when people say, conveniently enough, man, last year was one of his best coaching jobs ever. That is insulting to Nick Saban. It was one of his worst coaching jobs ever, because at the start of the year, they didn't know how to use their quarterback, because they lost at home by 10 points to Texas, a team they should have beat by 2 touchdowns, because they had to bench their starting quarterback. That is not a good coaching job. That is not being ready for the season. You look at the number of first rounders, this Alabama team should have, in my opinion, won a national title. We saw what they could do against Georgia. Their best was better than Georgia's best. We could play the injury game with Brock Bowers all day long, but bottom line was Jalen Milroe played better than Carson Beck when the team's season were on the line. So I'm not going to insult Nick Saban by saying that was one of his best coaching jobs, because it wasn't. And I'm also not going to sit here and say I'm convinced that he's done with college football, not because I know anything, or not because I think that, he can walk back on the sidelines and lead any team to victory, but because of the line in the Jurassic Park movie. I just can't get it out of my head. When they got the T-Rex there and they're trying to, give him a goat, and the scientist says, T-Rex doesn't want to be fed. Nick Saban does not want to be on the sidelines on college football Saturdays. And this cat is a competitor, and that is what has made him the best of our lifetime, is that he is never complacent. Now, unless there's some underlying health issues, which I don't think there is, he takes remarkable care of himself. I think he's got games left in him. I don't know if one season on the sidelines enough, Mike. I don't know if he needs some college football reform where he feels like he could do it and be competitive again. But I'm just 72 Nick Saban. I still would take a 73-year-old Nick Saban over 99% of the coaches in the country.
I'd like to see him take. Sorry,
go ahead.
I'd like to see him take a job that maybe he's not as good, like West Virginia. Like if he came full circle and took West Virginia, the team of his childhood, he grew up pulling for. There'd be a lot of couches burned in Morgantown for sure, the day of the press conference. But man, something like that, go to West Virginia for 2 or 3 years and hand it off. I don't know. That feels an awful lot like Lou Holtz at South Carolina. But I will say this: Saban at 72 is in much better shape than Lou was at 69.
Oh, heck yeah! I mean, I think, to your point, Mike, there's no question in my mind Nick could still do it. But I've told this story on the air. 2022 is the last Alabama football game I did on TV for the SEC network. And you know how those meetings are. You go in and you get 30 minutes with the head coach. You get whatever it is, 20 with the coordinators, and then Kool-Aid McKinstry and another guy. You get 10 minutes with them. But the 30 minutes with the coach, usually you're asking game-specific questions or things you like about your team. And I asked one rather innocuous question. I can't even remember what it was. And he took that baton. And I'm not kidding. He went over 20 minutes, a soliloquy, a diatribe, uninterrupted. It had nothing to do with the game. It had nothing to do with his team. It was the state of college football and how it was being completely train wrecked. And I left that meeting thinking, you know what? This guy doesn't want to do this in this climate much longer. And I know he doesn't want that to be his legacy. I quit because of NIL and the portal. But there's no doubt in my mind, like, that was it. Like, he just doesn't want to play that game. And Kirby manages to stay above that. And I don't know if Kirby likes it or not, but he knows you got to play the game if you're going to stay dominant. So, and Lane's been critical about it, but they just led the country in portal power. Right. And he found a bunch of money. So you either play the game and you win and you dominate, or you don't and you get left behind, or you do what Nick did. And you just say, you know what? I've had enough of this. You pull a Jay Wright, you pull a Krzyzewski, and you just say, I don't need this anymore in my life. I got a lot of money. I was all about coaching ball. It's not just about coaching ball anymore. What are your thoughts on the climate of all that?
Yeah, it's challenging. It's fluid. I've never seen college football with this many changes at one time. I mean, right about the time you solve one problem or think that you've got it down, the rules change, the transfer portal dates shift, people become immediately eligible, and yet the SEC is still saying that if you transfer this spring, you can't transfer and be immediately eligible within the SEC, which protects the SEC schools from each other, but hurts the conference overall because now other conferences come in and pilfer from the SEC and get guys immediately eligible. But to your point about what Kirby does, I mean, that's why he's so fascinating to me to cover as a coach. A lot of people will say, well, gosh, sometimes he snaps and sometimes he, listen, I don't go to the zoo to watch the bears sleep. I want Kirby Smart, and the best press conferences are on Tuesdays after practice when he comes in there and he's got the visor pulled down over his eyes and he's still a little sweaty and angry about whatever he saw on the field, and he's not really putting a filter on the answers. Monday he goes in there, he's all calm, he's relaxed, he knows everything he's going to be asked. He's got loafers on and looks like he could go to the business meeting and help raise money for the local baseball team. I want Coach Kirby on Tuesday because he cuts through some stuff, man, and some of his concepts and ideas. A lot of it is just being willing. It's efficiency, Mike. It's efficiency. There's nothing that Kirby does that's not designed towards winning a title. And I tell people this: if you want to know Kirby's answer to a question before you ask it, ask yourself, does it help him win a championship, yes or no? And whining and complaining about the rules is not going to help him win a championship. He's not going to waste any time on that. He was on the rules committee. He's given his input to his college football president, to his university president, who was on the NCAA committee. Kirby has played these things out to the extent that he can, and then he moves on. Everything is about efficiency with this cat. And now that you've got this portal where you're going to have attrition, you're going to lose guys. It was Kirby that said last December, hey, you guys are making this portal out to be a bad thing. It's not. There's some good things about the portal. And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean? You need some attrition. And JC understands this. For those young guys that come in, some of that dead weight's got to go out. Now, there were some tricky ways that coaches would do this before with the medical red shirt, right? And there was some hard conversation because you didn't want the reputation that you ran a kid off. What do you mean so-and-so had a scholarship and Saban told him to hit the bricks? Well, or maybe, Coach X, suddenly some guy is running after. I mean, you've seen some stuff over the years. They need those scholarships available. And now, like I saw Purdue, the Purdue head coach was there at the Spurrier banquet this year. And I talked to him. He's got 4 former Georgia guys. None of those guys were going to start. Let me tell you, for Purdue, getting those 4 Georgia guys under the Christmas tree, oh my God, they love these guys. They can't wait to get these 4 Georgia guys. At Georgia, we're like, what was that guy's name? Right? So it works in that sense where these players who get buried on deep depth charts have opportunities. Then meantime, those 4 slots open up, and now Kirby can pour in another class of 20 midterm signees. Of those 20, 12 will pan out. 2 or 3 will get injured, and another 5 or 6 will hit the portal in the next 2 years. That's how the power teams eat. And then there's the teams beneath that are getting the leftovers. Conversely, in Georgia basketball, I'm looking at their roster this year. They got some guy that played at Niagara, right? They got some guy that was a 1-year transfer at South Florida. They got another guy that Virginia dumped a few years ago. And then they got 2 top 100 freshmen. And this team is supposed to play against the likes of Kentucky and Alabama. You really think that Mike White has a shot with these guys? So Georgia, conversely, in basketball, they're trying to – and the word reject is too strong. That's not the right word. We're not going to say that. But they're trying to win with guys that couldn't start at other programs or that started anonymous programs. And that's what we're going to see with this portal. And Lane Kiffin is so far out in front of it, and he's smart enough. He's also got the Mississippi junior college system there. Lane is really good with his personnel. He's great. He's a great offensive coach. He's a fun character. He's one of those characters you need. Mike, I don't know if you ever did NASCAR, but I kind of liken these SEC coaches to the NASCAR circuit. And I always go with Saban. Saban's my Earnhardt, right? Like everybody, he was the man in black, right? And Nick is that guy. And I'm trying to, who is Lane Kiffin on the NASCAR? Sterling Marlin, maybe, I don't know, but he's a personality. He's a lot of fun.
I can't do a good my NASCAR references are out of date, but imagine if DeChambeau was winning more majors. He's got a little DeChambeau in him from the golf side. There's a lot of people that just hate Lane Kiffin. And I think he earned a lot of that negative. I've watched Lane mature, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
I mean, Lane, when he was at Tennessee and with the Raiders, quite frankly, he was unlikable. He was just not likable and did a lot of silly things and said a lot of silly stuff. Now I think he's extremely likable. I'm so glad that we have him in the SEC.
Oh, his color is great. He, not the best speaker in the world, but he's fantastic. There's not a better Twitter follow. He's getting better at the in-person stuff. That's, when we see him at SEC spring meetings and we get a little bit more one-on-one time. But you're right. What happened at Tennessee? I mean, he left that place like nuclear waste. I mean, there was a stench from that investigation that lasted, basically buried Derek Dooley because the NCAA investigation was hanging over the program the whole time. And then there were recruiting limitations that even leaked into Butch Jones. You say that I come with both barrels. Well, this isn't really a barrel. This is just a thought I've had in the offseason. And I mentioned Jeremy Pruitt a second ago, right? And I'm seeing how the NCAA went to court with Tennessee and Virginia. And they basically said, hey, you can't uphold these rules. You can't apply your NCAA rules to the Constitution of the United States. And if this kid wanted money for a collective and it stands up in a court of law, you can't that just doesn't hold water. How in the world do you tell somebody they can't work in their line of work for 5 years because of $60,000? I mean, I'm part of me is waiting for Jeremy Pruitt to go to court or something, because it's like, how do you do that? What other world does a coach get a show cause penalty where you can't even be on the field, you can't be in the stadium on game day because there were violations that equaled $60,000? When we've got players, I mean, I think I'm not joking here. This is true. I think that's less than the base salary that SEC starters have now through NIL for every starter. That's their base salary.
Well, if you go to the median NIL deal for starting quarterbacks in the SEC, it's probably close to $1 million.
And then there's Carson Beck.
Who's driving around in his Lamborghini. What is his deal, Mike? Have you gotten to the bottom of that one?
Listen, Carson is just this guy. I mean, you got to understand. Awkward is nerdy and awkward. Those are way too strong. But now I want you to picture, this is a guy who solves Rubik's Cube in under a minute. Okay. This is a guy who likes to spend time alone in his room. He's not a very social person. He solves the Rubik's Cube. He was a baseball player, with a scholarship. This is a guy who saw his chance at starting blow up because he had a bad week of practice, the UAB game. Stetson Bennett goes out there. UAB, forgets how to play defense, and Stetson's lobbing balls all over the field. And I think he had 4 or 5 touchdowns in the first half of that game. And if you're Carson Beck, you're realizing I was the starter at the beginning of this week, and I practiced so poorly that they pulled my starter card and started Stetson instead. And you've got 2 years, Mike, of watching that Wally Pipp action in front of you. I'm trying to wrap my brain around how hard that would be to stomach and swallow that was my opportunity that I lost. And yet he stayed in the program. So that background alone tells you he's a little different cat. And he is really, really good. As for this, we're trying to play this game that, there was no negotiation. He just loves college. Listen, there was a negotiation.
Sure.
Maybe not from Carson sitting down across from Kirby. That's not how it works. Everybody's got people. But the reality was, if Carson would have gone pro, he probably would have been third quarterback taken, started the second round. So what they did is they said, well, let's see how much what did the Kentucky quarterback Will
Levis?
Let's take a look at what Will Levis's contract was last year, because we think that's the comp for Carson. Okay. Mm-hmm. Somehow, some way, this is what I'm told. Sourced information. I've written it before. Nothing's official. That's another part of this transfer portal. It's NIL so hard is we don't have the cold hard numbers like you do in the NFL. They don't have to relinquish this information. But what I was told on pretty good authority was that they wanted a package. Similar, it's not a paycheck. And it didn't all come from Georgia. I was told a booster kicked in and said, how much you need? Okay, here's, whatever, $1 million, $2 million towards this package of the approximately $4 million, includes living quarters and money and all these different things. And Kirby got it done early. And that was so key because they locked down Carson Beck, Mike. They were able to get Trevor Etienne. who I think will be probably the biggest impact transfer in the league this year after watching him play Saturday. They were able to go out and get a couple of talented receivers like Colby Young from Miami, like London Humphreys, this rising star kid out of Vanderbilt. Kirby did what he had to do, right? Like, we go back to it. Fundamentally, how many people like it? You're going to let some kid tell you what you got to – does it help me win a championship? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, do it. Get it done. Let's move on. And now Carson, watching him in that spring game, let me tell you, this guy is putting balls on the spot like Aaron Rodgers. Now, his numbers didn't look great because they're playing the same team that plays them every day. They're mixing up different things. They're not going to show you their best work. But Georgia has an NFL quarterback this year on their roster. And it cost him a little bit of money. But if they didn't have this guy, Mike, they wouldn't have a chance to win a national championship this year.
I'll just say one thing on that. And I know JC's got a question. For those that despise all that is NIL, I'm going to give you one thing that I think is really good about NIL for college football and for the young men who play it. The numbers of kids that were declaring early and clearly got bad advice. Kids that declared early thought they'd be a middle to a high round draft pick, not drafted at all. Kids that were told, oh yeah, you're going to be a first rounder, drafted in the third round. And a kid like Carson Beck, in the non-NIL period, he'd have to go pro. Yep. You'd leave too much money on the table, he would be gone. Okay, now those guys are staying because a 7-figure NIL, like, that's literal pro money. Like, your rookie deal in NFL, you're not necessarily getting that much, or it's comparable at least. So I would say that is the one positive thing, because it's not like college basketball where you can leave after 1 year. It's not like baseball where you can go straight out of high school. In college football, you have a 3-year commitment regardless. And a lot of guys, after their redshirt sophomore year or their third year, they would bolt and get terrible advice, and it would be bad for the school and it'd be bad for the young man. Now with NIL, less and less of those mistakes are being made. So I will say that for those that just think NIL is the bane of all existence, I don't think it is. I think it needs some guardrails, but that is one positive I would just point out about it.
Did you see JC had a question?
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so looking at Georgia, obviously the Rick Pitino called Kentucky basketball the Roman Empire of college basketball recently. Right now, Georgia's maybe Athens or Sparta. They're getting there, I mean, it's and look, I've worked in Georgia. I've covered. I know a lot of dogs.
Yeah,
they were a long-suffering bunch, as you well know. So for the fans that I know, especially my friends, not the ones that bark in your face when you're walking in the stadium or get down on all fours and hike their leg like one kid did last year. For their good fans, I'm happy for them. You're looking at the schedule, though. It's not the SEC East sort of cakewalk that it has been. Mike, at Alabama, you got to go to Bryant-Denny. You got to go to Darrell K. Royal in Texas. You got to go to Vaught Hemingway. At Kentucky, yeah. If Clemson's offense were a little better, I'd say that would be a challenge. This schedule is a lot more challenging than maybe the last 2 or 3 have been for the Dogs. How do you think that'll factor into the possibilities this season as we do away with, and I don't like that, by the way, doing away with divisions, but as we do away with divisions and go 1 through 16 and all that stuff?
Well, I mean, JC, you're right. I mean, this schedule this year is ridiculous. And in Georgia's 29-game win streak, just to put this into perspective, I think we're all – I don't think Georgia was quite as dominant last year as maybe, when they rode off into the sunset, they were stomping Florida State into the ground and, fighting the good fight as a program that opted in. Kids that, well, why play in a bowl game if it's not a playoff? Because we love each other, because we want to play with our brothers one more time. Whereas Florida State's like, show me the money, I'm out of here, don't really care. And they have to stand there and watch their teammates and their school's image take a 63-3 beating that will never go away. Will never go away. When Georgia and Florida State sit down together in a living room recruiting the same guy, that conversation will be had, that this program was all in and this program was all about the money. And there's nothing that Mike Norvell can do about that. That is a score in a moment that will never go away. Should have been made a bigger deal of, frankly, because whenever these people, we got to do something about this in college. Yeah, you got to do something. You got to teach your kids character. You got to teach your kids commitment. You got to do enough for them that they want to do something for you. You got to be that kind of coach that serves your team and where they feel that obligation, where they want to play that game. That's what you do about it. You do a better job as a coach and as a mentor. And you don't rely as much on transfers who have not invested anything into the program, so they don't feel any responsibility toward the Spear. They were just there for the check. Don't expect them to risk anything because they came for the money. So they're going to leave for the money. Georgia kids, less transfers, more guys brought up through the program, they're going to be more bought in. So I digress. When we look at the 29-game Georgia win streak, which, by the way, tied Clemson for the longest in the college. I'm saying all these things because people are probably, why didn't we hear this? Because they don't talk about it. This was the longest win streak. It is longer than anything Nick Saban did. In the college football playoff era, 29 straight wins. And they beat I want to say they beat 5 or 7 top 5 teams. Here's an amazing stat for you. Vince Dooley's Herschel Walker teams never beat a top 5 team, and they were never a preseason top 5. So if you want to talk about even the golden years and the good old days, they weren't this good. Not even close. This is a whole nother level that Georgia football has ever done, even before the great Herschel Walker. Listen, I'm not going to sell Clemson down the river. I know Dabo. I know you talk about a guy that invests hard. It's the first game of the season. Clemson's won 5 in a row ever since that goofy phone call that got Dabo so doggone mad when he told everybody to invest in Clemson. Wink, wink. I got the message, Dabo. Thank you. That paid off very well. The guy has not lost another game since. These coaches know what it's all about, and Clemson is going to put up a fight, guys. I'm going to tell you that is not going to be a blowout game. Clemson is going to give Georgia trouble. Kentucky, I mean, listen, Kentucky is always one of those – black and blue matches. I don't know what the scoreboard says, but everybody's walking off the field pretty sore, after Mark Stoops. I mean, I think Texas A&M would have done well to hire this guy. I think Alabama would have done well to hire this guy. I think there was a history of hiring Kentucky coaches to Alabama. They did pretty well. I think Bama would have been better off with Mark Stoops. But I digress. That game is in Lexington. Brock Vandagriff, who was the number 2 quarterback at Georgia, is going to be the quarterback for the Wildcats. Do you think they're going to have a pretty good idea about the Georgia playbook? Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who is the quote-unquote heart and soul of the Georgia defense, is their starting middle linebacker. He's an All-American and former Butkus Award finalist. Those guys are going to be the leaders of that team. They are going to control the pulse. And those Wildcats, whatever game they got in them, whatever they've got ability, they're going to be ready in Lexington for Georgia, and they will know the offense. So these 2 games – Clemson and Kentucky, you may go, Clemson, Kentucky. Let's go back a minute now. That 29-game win streak, only 5 of those games were single-digit games. Only 5. Auburn was one of them last year. Auburn. Missouri was one. Missouri? Georgia Tech? There was some close game, and then they lost to Alabama? I'm forgetting. There was another single-score game in there, but Georgia was not as dominant as they looked at the end of the year. That team, there were 5 straight games, guys. This is amazing. There were 5 straight games where Georgia gave up a score on the opening drive. 5 in a row. And when the last one, when it happened against Tennessee on the second, which all the Georgia players said it was the loudest stadium they'd ever been, when Tennessee scored on first or second play of the game, and the guy goes 60, this running back just blows up the middle. Neyland Stadium just explodes. I mean, you can just feel the orange in the air. It's just like, holy. I mean, I've covered that team for 12 years, and when that place went off, it was like a bomb when Tennessee scored early. And after the game, we asked Kirby about it, and we ask him about it after every game. He knows he goes, well, he said, he said, me and Shu were talking, and I said, well, let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. We know they're going to score early. Let's just let them go ahead and score. Kirby expressing a little humor, and ironically enough, that let enough air out of the room that it didn't happen again. But then they play Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I will say Georgia will be the more prepared team, having faced Clemson and Kentucky. That's a double-edged sword, right? Bama's going to have a better idea who Georgia is, but Georgia will have a better idea about themselves. I think Bama plays maybe Wisconsin or something is their early game. So that's a tough – you mentioned Texas. That, by the way, their coach was the last active coach, Tom Herman, to beat Georgia back in 2018 in the Sugar Bowl. And that was also the last game that Kirby lost when he had more than a week to prepare. This Texas game is going to be big. Quinn Ewers, Carson Beck, you're probably talking about 2 of the 3, if not 4 Heisman favorites going head-to-head the middle of October. Then you talk about Ole Miss, at Ole Miss. Boy, Kirby got housed there bad by Hugh Freeze his first year. I don't think he's won in that stadium yet. That can be a house of horrors for teams. It's a small place. It's a little bit out there, a little bit different than what Georgia used to going into. But I don't write off Auburn. I don't write off Tennessee, because this is the SEC, man. And every week the emotions are at a fever pitch. And if you don't match those emotions, or if Carson has a bad day, listen, they were almost down 2 scores at Vanderbilt last year. I mean, at Vanderbilt. I mean, I'm not joking. I'm watching this game, and Georgia Tech and Brent Key has given all them what they've wanted. Brent Key, who has the formula because he was on the Saban staff after Kirby, who understands Georgia, whose team spends 365 thinking about nothing but Georgia. And you got to play this team the week before you go play in the SEC title game.
They've had nothing else to think about because they haven't done anything else for the most part on the flats. Hey, final 60 seconds. When Georgia makes it to Atlanta for another SEC, I mean, that was a great speech on how good the league is and how things can trip Georgia up. I don't disagree with any of that. That being said, when they make it to the SEC championship game again in Atlanta, who do you think they're going to face?
Wow. Man, that is
no divisions, as JC pointed out. It's whoever's number 2.
You heard me be critical of Nick Saban earlier. Who's to say that Kalen DeBoer doesn't do a better job than Nick Saban in year 1? Who's to say?
I would not be surprised at all if Alabama's in Atlanta taking on Georgia in yet another matchup between the Dogs and the Tide.
Jalen Milroe, to me, does not get enough credit. I know he's had some bad moments. I know we joked a little bit earlier about him making the wrong read against Michigan and costing his team the game. But I watched that guy at Auburn. I was at Auburn. I saw the Auburn miracle throw there and the never say die attitude. And I watched the SEC title game and kept waiting for Jalen Milroe to have a Milroe moment, and he didn't. He was flawless. And if he's got a coach who can work with him and get this guy dialed in, I think he is phenomenal, man. I mean, this guy, his athleticism, his arm strength, his leadership. If gun to head, I would probably say Alabama. I mean, part of me wants to say Texas, but there's just something about Texas that in the big moment they kind of wilt a little bit. I don't know that they're ready for the SEC week after week after week, even though they're a very attractive team to me. Those Alabama kids, the ones that stayed. But at the end of the day, the best players make plays. And I'm a big proponent of Jalen Milroe. I'm a big believer in him. And I guess I'd say Alabama.
I would probably second that. This is going to be a referendum on Texas this year, first year in the SEC. I want to see it. I'm a Ewers guy. I think Ewers has a chance to be phenomenal this year. All right, last one. Take Bama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, obviously Georgia off the board. Give me a dark horse team. Give me somebody who's kind of a breakthrough year, like a Missouri last year that we're not talking about.
Like a Missouri this year. Look at their schedule. Look at the players they've recruited. Maybe Eli Drinkwitz will actually earn that award this year. I mean, but Drink's got to learn how to win, man. I mean, you can't be, doing stuff with handshakes and Josh Heupel. I mean, you can't do that. It's the big time. The SEC is a big time lead. Look, I like Drinkwitz because he's got personality, right? He kind of reminds me a little bit of the Nutty Professor, right? He's kind of fun. He's kind of an underdog you can cheer for. He is a great offensive mind. He is a very good coach. And Missouri has a ton of momentum. And what Missouri has done, in my opinion, is they have figured out what's next. And next is corporate. And you saw they made this change. And Desiree Reed-Francois is a fantastic athletic director. I know her personally. She did an unbelievable job there. But from what I understand, and I need to dig a little bit deeper into this, I'm throwing something half out there. Don't like to do that. But I do think this is a big secret and big key, is they've got some kind of board at the top of this program now. And somehow or another, they're being managed a little differently at the top, right? Different situations call for different strategies. And Missouri has found something. And they are getting the type of money that they need to get the type of players that they need. And they're tapping in, from what I'm told, they're tapping into St. Louis and Kansas City. And the name of the game, the race to the finish, Mike, is who can get corporate sponsorship for their programs. You can only squeeze these boosters for so much. These poor guys, every time you go back to them, they gotta check their 401k. They got to take another $10 million from their grandkids. I mean, this is pressing these folks. They're doing everything they can. You're asking fans to put money in a donation bucket. You're asking small businesses to sponsor a player. You got to get corporate sponsorship. And I think somehow, some way, I think Missouri is onto something. And I don't think they're a dark horse. I think they are absolutely for real. When you were asking me who Georgia might see, Missouri was one of the 2 or 3 teams that came to mind first. I think they have tremendous momentum. You got to have the momentum. You got to have the hunger. And that program is hungry. You talk about a program that's been stomped on. Now, and oh, by the way, Ohio State says thank you very much for beating us in that game, because then the Buckeye fans went, what? We lost to who? How much money do you need? Let's grab us this Quinshon Junkins. Let's get us this Caleb Downs. This is an insult to Ohio State football to get beat by Missouri. And look at what Ohio State's done. We didn't talk about national. Ohio State, my gosh, look what they have done. They took Alabama's center. They took their best defensive player. They took the best running back out of the SEC in a program that's already. But Ohio State, what do they have? Columbus, Ohio, major league city, big time, second largest city in the state of Ohio. Corporate sponsorship, Mike. That's going to be the key.
That goes back to my geography. There's some programs that have inherent advantages geographically. And I'm not talking about, well, this is more tropical climate than the I'm talking about their financial resources. And if you have Georgia's got Atlanta, for crying out loud. That's a major advantage. Some programs have more than others. It's just, we still are in a have NIL, portal, everything. It's still haves and have-nots in college football. I mean, let's be honest.
Stratified. The problem for Georgia that's different than Alabama, and you know this, is it's stratified. You got the Braves, you got the Falcons, you got the You go to Bama, and there's either Roll Tide or War Eagle on that license plate. You go to Tennessee, and everything's orange. The traffic barrels, the orange and white, the gold vowels. The state is about. The Titans are the Titans, but the vowels are still the vowels, right? And whereas even in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, you get into the Midwest, these programs are more stratified. That's what Georgia's got to do, though. You mentioned Atlanta. I agree. They have to have Atlanta. And it don't sound like we're plotting some military battle here. They've got to win Atlanta, Mike. They got to hold the line.
It's a game of risk. You move your little armies into each of the territories.
JC's, though, but the recruiting, dude. I mean, it's like this in recruiting. There's certain areas where certain teams have certain schools and certain ties. And you don't know who's who until you get really deep into it. Why are all these kids from this school going to this school? Because they've won that territory, essentially. And that's part of the fun with this too. Let's face it, there's a lot of regionalism still in college football.
Yeah, I hope we don't lose that. That's for sure. Griff, great job as always. Keep stirring it up, my man. Keep doing a great job over there at Dog Vent and AJC, and I'm sure we'll see each other down the road.
All right, appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much. Good to see you again, JC.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you, dude.
All right, guys.
Great.